is going on, everybody, and welcome back. It is Dog Talk with your host, Holden. I am very glad to be back with you guys after I've taken quite a hiatus over the last, a lot of months as far as visually things have gone, but even over pretty much the last month, not having anything coming to you guys on the audio side. So I'm really excited to get back with you guys and kind of talk about a bunch of different things. Obviously, we've got a lot that's going on in college football right now, and this is all about Georgia. That's what we're here for. We're here to talk the dog, and that's what we're going to be doing in this episode, obviously. A lot to jump into. Just want to tell you guys how much I appreciate you guys watching, listening, all the things out there. I couldn't be more glad to get back online with you guys in this format. I've got a lot of things that are still going on around me that'll be changing, over time. You might see different picture jerseys, stuff like that kind of show up, lights. I don't know. Lots still kind of going on, but I at least wanted to get on and try to get back on track a little bit with college football and where we are, because, again, I'm fairly certain the last time we at least talked on podcast format, that was the Texas game, the big win after Texas, which is huge. Great spot to kind of end off on. Great kind of ending to that, where we just kind of took a really long break, and a lot of football has been played since then. Now, I'm not going to try to play this part of, hey, let me catch you up over the last month or however long it's even been since that football game happened, which has been, to me, probably even longer than that, maybe even a month and a half. But we are going to be talking about this Georgia Tech game. That's where we are as far as in the season goes. That just happened on Friday night. It is Sunday here, so I'm kind of peeking back and forth, looking at the Bills NFL games on late here Sunday night that I'm kind of looking at, because I've got, I think everybody's doing the fantasy league now, and I've joined in with a couple of friends of ours, so kind of keeping an eye on some things over there at the same time. But like I was saying just off the top there, kind of want to get back in the groove of things. So very excited for you guys to be back in here with us as well. So let's kind of get into it. News and rumors of some things that have been going on here recently, in this recent time, not dating back again to how long it's been since I've actually done anything. But obviously North Carolina head coach Mack Brown, he has now retired, fired. Don't exactly know what happened there, because I know in years past there's been, hey, he decided he's retiring, and then did he really retire? And now they're saying, all right, he's fired. I don't really know, and I don't want to dive too deep into it, but I know that there have been slight rumors of maybe the potential that Glenn Schumann goes and takes that job. I don't know. This is all rumors kind of coming out early here. And then the latest thing that I saw earlier today, and this could have even been yesterday, I think it was today though, that it looks like Julian Humphreys is going to be jumping off the ship there with the Dogs and headed to the transfer portal. The portal doesn't open up till December 9th, I think it is, so a little bit of time before that opens, but I can also understand why some guys are probably going to try to put their name in there early, try to get their name in there now, so that way, hey, they let somebody else know, hey, we're available. When that time comes, I just want you guys to know that I'm available. So that's kind of what we've got there as far as news and notes. Injury updates, I don't really have anything from the Georgia Tech game itself as far as specifics on that, other than the fact that we obviously didn't see Trevor Etienne in this game. It looked like he was dressed, had the jersey on, but more in street clothes than anything. Don't really know what that means moving forward as we move into the next series that we're going to be matching up in, which we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Obviously, the game at hand did not necessarily matter on Friday. That's kind of hard to wrap my mind around, too, the fact that I can't say it was a Saturday game, even though technically it did end on Saturday. But the Friday game against Georgia Tech, it didn't have implications for playing for the next game, which is the SEC Championship game. Regardless, you knew that you were going to be in that football game. Win, lose, draw, tie, doesn't matter. You're at least playing for it, which keeps your playoff hopes alive regardless of what happens in the game. Now, nobody wants to lose that football game against Georgia Tech at all, but at least you had that on the back burner to say, well, I'm still getting to the playoffs either way. Don't think that's the way that the players took this, but it was definitely a fight throughout this entire football game. I've got a lot of papers that we're going to kind of go through, break down some stats, kind of quarter by quarter, and look at just kind of the progression of how this game went and how, well, you'll just see. We'll kind of dive into it in that way, and you'll see what it looks like from that point on as we talk about it and go through all of the things. But at least we know that Georgia's playing in the SEC championship game, and after all the games this weekend, we now know who we're matching up against, and it is going to be that rematch of Texas and Georgia coming up in the SEC championship game next week, which is going to be another exciting football game. Obviously, that already happened one time in Austin. Georgia had to go on the road at night and play. Georgia somewhat gets favored in this by being not really home, but you're playing in Atlanta, not really far from you. You've played there a lot between national championships, between SEC championships. You started the season there. What a great way to kind of work into the SEC championship game and hopefully not end your season there, but be playing there again in that venue at Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta to hopefully take that back again, take that SEC championship game and take the trophy itself back to Athens, where it has been the past couple of years under Kirby Smart with the national championship a couple of years ago and winning the SEC as well. I know Kirby loves the SEC championship game. He wants that. He wants his team to be able to win that and have that. And I hope that the players kind of look at that the same exact way. So we at least know what we've got to look forward to. We'll dive into that later on this week once we start talking about that Texas and Georgia rematch that's going to be coming up. But tonight, this is what we've got on tap. We're recapping this Georgia Tech game, which, again, was a huge one. Obviously set records in a bunch of different ways. But, hey, if you guys have made it this far, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I know it's kind of hard to look and say, why would I subscribe to you? You hadn't put anything out this year. Hopefully you can kind of go back and look at some of the past, and that's just kind of what we do here is we break down some of the games, kind of give some of our opinions on what we think is going to happen. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we do not get it right at all. Hopefully I'll kind of get back in gear with a lot of the ways that we used to do things as far as keys to the game and stuff like that. But it's just been, as you can see around me, this is not the same setup that it was in previous videos if you guys watch those. So a lot's been going on in my life as far as that goes. But, hey, we're back at it, and I'm looking forward to it. So, again, just like and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you guys don't like watching video, hey, that's cool, too. Wherever you guys have found us, I appreciate you guys. We are on podcast form as well. Anywhere you guys want to watch or anywhere you guys want to listen, I think it's on just about anything that you could possibly find as far as listening podcast-wise. I'm going to take some coffee because it's going to take it tonight. It's 11 o'clock. We're going to get through this thing. Just like we did Friday night against Georgia Tech. What a football game. Had you told me ahead of this thing, hey, first of all, Georgia's not going to score they're not going to score a touchdown in the first half of this game against Georgia Tech. Coming into this, I'd have been like, man, that's a really, really slow start, especially against a Georgia Tech team who in years past, with exception of last year, has been fairly inferior. Georgia Tech has come a long way, especially last season. The game that we played them last year was a little bit of a reminder to me coming into this game, even though it's a Friday night, even though it's Georgia Tech, even though it's somebody that we should be able to handle, that game wasn't a blowout last year. That game was a lot closer than I think some people remember last season, and that's a lot of the reason that I was looking at this going, wait a minute, guys. I don't think this is just going to be a blowout. Now, again, if you had told me, hey, you're not going to score a touchdown in the first half, I'd be a little bit nervous, especially to look and say, hey, by the way, you're getting shut out in the first half. It's going to be 17-0 by the time you get to halftime. You're not going to score a touchdown until later on in this football game. And by the way, the fourth quarter is where you'll come alive. That part I'd have probably believed you on because Georgia seems to be a much better second-half team this season, but a fourth-quarter team that as well. Like I said, we're going to kind of break this thing down and look at some of the stats and see how some of this played out throughout the game because it is telling the difference in what Georgia was doing and what Georgia Tech was doing in the first half of this football game, even quarter by quarter. A lot of credit goes out to Georgia Tech in this football game because they schemed up a lot better than us, just plain and simple. They had a lot better coaching going on in this football game, and that's not me harping against our coaches. That's just me saying, hey, this is flat out what happened. And the facts are in the paper. The facts are on the field. The fact that you weren't in the lead in this football game, the fact you were down 17-0 at the half, there's a reason behind all of those things. We're going to kind of break it down and look at it. In the first half of this game, this is going to look final. Those are my team statistics overall, which we're going to kind of get into some of those as well. Again, I'm going to probably start throwing papers here in just a little bit. But it might help if I picked up the quarter-by-quarter stats instead of the others. All right, here we go. First quarter. This is how this football game starts. Not necessarily like the worst thing in the world because Georgia did start to get some things moving, but not a lot. Not a lot. Here's your total yardage in this first quarter alone. Georgia Tech 131 yards on 15 plays. Georgia also had 15 plays on 67 yards. And by the way, in this, turnovers, there were none in that. So you look at it and you go, well, how in the world does Georgia not have it like that? How did they not have nearly the yardage? Pretty simple. 8 minutes and 30 seconds is Georgia Tech's time of possession in this. This is something I've noticed that I've kind of started to harp on more and more as seasons have gone along, especially last year. I think it was one. Georgia's time of possession is a little bit different. You know, sometimes we kind of speed things up, but teams have also kind of figured out, hey, you can slow this football game down a lot against Georgia, and it's going to be a problem. I think the third quarter in this game, if I remember correctly, Georgia barely had the football at all in this third quarter, and Tech was very smart to just run the clock, eat as much of it as you could. Probably wish they'd have done more of that in the fourth quarter because there wasn't a lot of time left in this football game before Georgia actually made the really strong comeback late in this one. You gave up, I gave up, we all gave up, especially at that point in time. But anyways, Georgia did not have a single first down in the first quarter. That's also another reason you don't get very many yardage. I lied. They had 3. Tech had 5, but Georgia Tech had scored at least a field goal in this one so far. In that first quarter, Haynes King in the game has thrown for only 15 yards. He's rushed for 15 yards in that. He's thrown for 33. So not really a lot happened in this game. Nate Frazier's rushed for 12. Dwight Phillips has rushed for 10 in it so far. And then Beck has thrown it for 37. So far, not necessarily the worst-looking football game you've seen so far. Again, 3-0 at the end of the first quarter. Not too bad. Now we get to the second quarter. Here's where things kind of take a little bit of a turn. Tech in this one gets 14 points, obviously 2 touchdowns in it. They have 10 first downs to Georgia's only 4. This is only second quarter. We're not looking at the half so far. This is just a quarter-by-quarter comparison. In this one, Georgia has thrown for 72 yards, whereas Tech has thrown for 117. And in this, here's a big statistical difference in it. 176 yards so far in just the second quarter alone for Georgia Tech, whereas Georgia had 70 yards. That's a 106 yards difference in the entire deal there. And again, no turnovers in this one. There was one fumble, but they didn't lose it. But there's no turnovers that have happened so far except for on Georgia's part in this one. And Georgia Tech made them pay for that. Georgia Tech, this may be the quarter I'm thinking of now that I look at it. Time of possession, Georgia Tech had the ball 11 minutes and 18 seconds in the second quarter. Georgia, on the other hand, had it 3 minutes and 42 seconds. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. And in this, that 11 minutes and 18 seconds, I think maybe it was the second quarter. I thought it was the third, but regardless, 11 minutes and 18 seconds, Georgia Tech went 4 for 5 on third downs in this entire quarter. Just the second quarter alone, 4 for 5. You got to get off the field on third downs. Otherwise, you're going to play a really late game. So when we look at it at the halftime, everything added together, 17-0 obviously. Georgia Tech has more than doubled first downs, 15-7. Against Georgia's. Georgia in the time has thrown or made 137 yards, 109 of which have come through the air. 307 is the comparison there for Georgia Tech at this point. 150 of that has come through the air, so very balanced on their part as far as running, which was also a tough thing to see for Georgia as well, because when you have a team that's rushing 157 yards on you and they've thrown 150 yards on you, it's a tough day. Again, Tech also almost doubled that time of possession in this one. 19:48 is how long they had the ball. Georgia only had it for 10 minutes in this one. Third down conversions. At this point, Tech was 5 for 8. They were 0 for 1 on fourth. Georgia was 2 for 6 and 1 for 2 on fourth. There was the one fumble in there and no interceptions in that one. So that was at least a big one. That's what your halftime stats look like. You're down at this point again 17-0. Carson Beck's stat line looks like this. 10 for 17, 98 yards. He's been sacked once in this game, had one 19-yard pass. Then you had Nate Frazier again carrying the load right here. 15 yards to Dwight Phillips, 10. Carson Beck, 6. Again, this kind of gets adjusted a little bit once he starts to kind of have to scramble around, which we're going to get to. But that's your halftime. Looking at the half right there, a lot of guys at this point are going, what is happening? Myself included, because I'm wondering why. I had the rant a couple of episodes ago, technically now, because it's been a couple of episodes since I'd done this rant where I'd just been waiting on that Georgia team to show up. And then in the Texas game, not Tech, Georgia showed up, and they did all the things that I was hoping they would maybe do. Not saying it's me. I know it's not. It's not just little old me over here saying the same thing, but having that rant about what are we doing? Why are we? And I've heard people say this before. Why do we play down to some teams and up to other teams? You play down to this team in Georgia Tech, which I'm not saying is a bad football team, and then you play up to a Texas team at their house at night. You have all the reason to probably lose that football game, and you don't. You play immaculately. Defense is completely different. Offense was clicking in that football game. I just don't understand it. And then it's the same thing like with Tennessee. First half, slow, not really doing a lot. Second half, you took care of business defensively and offensively. It just always makes me really curious. It's just a strange year in college football. But I will say this. Part of it that I think helps me kind of remember this, when I remember this, I should say, and I want to kind of share this as well because I think it'll kind of hopefully help kind of temper some of our expectations too. You played a really hard schedule this season, and you made it 10-2 through that season. I know Hunter and I talk preseason every single year, and I can recall that's probably something that we talked about coming into this one is how many losses do you think Georgia has? And at my personal opinion at the time, I was like, I think we have the one. I don't know where it comes. I don't know if it's Texas. I don't know if it's Alabama. I don't know if it's Ole Miss. At that time, I think I would have probably said, I think the loss might come to Texas, if anywhere. Well, it didn't. It came to two other opponents. Didn't really think that we would struggle the way that we did against Ole Miss. But again, we're at the end of the season right now, and you're a 10-2 football team, even if it took 8 overtimes for Georgia Tech at the end of the season. So as part of me is kind of, I try to recall that and say you have the number one strength of schedule and probably the number one strength of record if I was just guessing. I don't have that paperwork in front of me. Should ask my guy Eric over there at the Bulldog Report. He's probably got those stats in front of him. But I don't exactly know if Georgia has that number one strength of record, but I would be shocked if it wasn't, considering the schedule they have in front of them and the fact that they went 10-2 in that. And right now, AP poll, you're ranked 5th. I know the last I looked, I think we were ranked 7th in the college football playoff poll. I believe that'll come out again on Tuesday. We'll see where we're ranked there. And then you got to play Texas next weekend, so that'll kind of shift them things around, win, lose, whatever happens in that football game. But I try to help myself by saying, you've played a really, really hard schedule. The fact you're 10-2, be okay with that, because you're not going to get your best every week when you're playing on the road at night or when you're playing at home at night or at home during the day or your neutral site at 3:30 or 3:40 or 4 o'clock, whatever the times are. You're not always going to be able to play perfect football. You're not always going to be able to put up 500 yards in a game. You're not always going to be able to stop teams from not scoring 30 points against you. And that's something that I've realized into this season, especially with what's going on around college football as a whole. It's not just Georgia. Georgia's not the only team struggling this season. There's only one undefeated team there at the top, and that's Oregon. And they still haven't faced the opponents that Georgia has. There's a lot of other teams in the country right now. They've got a lot that they still have to figure out. And guess what? They only have a week to do it, because some of these teams that are about to be playing in these conference championship games coming up next weekend, it's win or you're out. That's all there is to it. Georgia, luckily, kind of sits in a position right now, regardless of everything that's happened, where I think at this point, even if you lose, you still have that opportunity in. Let's get back to the Tech game while we're at it here. Let's get to the third quarter. This is where Georgia starts to turn things around. Georgia does score 6 points in the game, goes for 2. Ton of questions saying, why in the world do you go for 2? I know Kirby said, hey, we kind of follow some analytics and we do some things like that. We try to follow it to a T. I know all of us were sitting here going, I don't get this one, Kirby. And I didn't. At the time, I sit back too, and I'm going, I don't think it does you any good. Even if you get it, I don't think it does you any good. It's still a 3-possession football game. But nonetheless, I ain't the one in charge over there. But it does definitely, by the end of it, you go, hindsight 2020. You kick it, you win the game by 1. You don't have to do all these overtimes. Hey, we just wanted to put on a thriller for a Friday night, right? But in this, Georgia still only has 2 first downs in this third quarter. Possession, it was the third quarter as well. I want to get to it. Georgia Tech, 11 minutes, 25 seconds. And I'm fairly certain one of the drives that they had, and it could have been the second quarter that I'm mistaken, one of the drives that they had, they drove all the way down the field in like 10 minutes. And I feel like it was the third quarter, and they may have had the turnover in the third quarter, but I don't see it, so I don't think it was. But regardless, Georgia does lead that quarter at least. 6 points in it, only 2 first downs. They throw it for 19 yards and rush it for 38. So must have dealt with a short field. It's kind of hard to remember it all in this time. I would imagine in that Georgia might only have one possession in that entire drive, that entire quarter, maybe 2, maybe starting in a second one. But it couldn't have been very much. Let's see, Carson Beck was 3 for 6, 19 yards, and had the 1 touchdown. That was what came right there too. Was it Cash Jones? I don't remember who the touchdown was to. Is that bad of me? That's pretty bad of me. Because I don't remember who the touchdown went to in the third quarter. You guys can probably help me out. You can probably look and say, hey, dummy, this is who it was to. But anyways, that's where we looked in the third quarter. And then when you kind of add all these numbers together, everything together, this is where it looks. Now it's Georgia 17-6. This was the point that I started going, all right, we're not out of this football game. There's still enough time left to play this. And then we get to just continuing through all stats. Look at this right here. Georgia Tech has already, and we're just starting the fourth quarter, had the ball for half of the football game, 31 minutes and 13 seconds. Georgia only having it for 13:47 in this one. At this point, Georgia starts to catch up, but offensively, Georgia Tech still leading 401 yards to Georgia's only 194. So a lot to do to kind of catch up at this point. Beck does have 117 yards, only has 10 incompletions, 13 for 23 with the 1 touchdown. And it's weird that this thing still does not say who the touchdown was to. But anyways, I digress. I'm fairly certain it was Dominic Lovett because I think that's when he got crushed in the end zone for what looked like a target to me, but you don't want to talk to these other people about targeting. Because that's a big, big conversation for a lot of people. But anyways, we get to the fourth quarter. Here's the magic, ladies and gentlemen. Georgia scores 21 points in the fourth quarter to Georgia Tech's 10. When this fourth quarter started, because obviously third quarter 17-6, coming into the fourth quarter. When Georgia Tech, I think maybe Georgia scored first, and maybe it made it 17-13. No, I think Tech had scored again, and I was like, this game's over. I don't think we can do this, because then it was like the margin was still 2 touchdowns. It was late in this football game. I know I've seen the graphic. I don't have it up here for you guys to be able to pull up for you. I wish I'd have thought about it ahead of time. I do that a lot on this show if you have watched long enough. But that's another stat that I think of right there where Georgia, under 5 minutes to play, was still down by 2 touchdowns and managed to not only tie the game, but then go on to win it, especially being down the way that they were. Here we get to the fourth quarter. Just the fourth quarter alone. Again, Georgia outscores Georgia Tech 21-10. Does have the ball for more in this quarter than Georgia Tech, which was a little bit of hindsight 20. I don't want to keep saying that, but really looking back on Georgia Tech's part, the fact that they didn't try to keep the ball a little bit better. And I also want to give credit to Georgia's defense in this time too, because defensively, this is where Georgia really stepped up. You know, there have been times where Georgia was kind of struggling to get things stopped, really the run, especially on the outside, and especially by Haynes King. Again, credit out to him for what he did in this football game. But not being able to stop and get off the field helped a lot in this fourth quarter because we held them to 1 for 4 on third downs and 0 for 1. They only went for it once, but didn't get it on fourth downs in this quarter alone, whereas we went 2 for 3 on third downs. This was a huge difference in the game. Also didn't help Georgia Tech's favor that they fumbled at one time, and we did get on top of that. Helped us a lot. Helped us a lot with the comeback. Shout out Dan Jackson. What a dude. What a dude. In this quarter alone, Carson Beck throws for 124 yards, and we rush it for 37 yards and end up with 161 yards to their 107. Again, it was a huge quarter to make the comeback. This is Carson Beck, 12 for 17 just in this quarter alone, 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nate Frazier did rush at 25 yards. Carson had to run it a couple times for 19 yards. Just in this quarter alone, again, we'll kind of adjust things here at the end in just a minute. This is where Dominic Lovett got his touchdowns in there as well. Just a huge game in this one. C.J. Allen, big hits in here. Starks, Smile Munden. I mean, everybody kind of getting in on the action, and then we kind of get to the end of things here. Again, Dan Jackson doesn't make the play that he did there in the fourth quarter and putting us where we were on the short end of the field. This game's over. They get a couple more first downs. They probably do bleed the clock as much as they can, and we don't make this comeback. Thank goodness for another walk-on. And shout out to a guy in Dan Jackson who plays with heart every single game. Here's what overtime looks like. I didn't break this thing down by like 1 overtime, 2 overtimes, all the way down to 8. It's all compiled, every bit of it, because this is what's nuts to me. Georgia scores 17 points in overtime. Georgia Tech scores 15 points in overtime. Here's another thing that kind of blew my mind when I thought about it. The fact that Georgia had 6 points with under 5 minutes to play, basically, in this football game. And they ended with 44 points. Still to this moment, blows my mind, the fact that that's what happened in this. But here's what we look like. Obviously, not going for it on third downs. And it's really funny how they put the time of possession because they try to give you an entire quarter with the football, basically. But throwing it, 45 yards. Rushing it, 5 yards for Georgia's part, whereas they threw it for 26 and 29. Y'all, these new overtime rules, I knew it when this has started, that this is not only going to be complicated, but this is also going to be really frustrating, and I can't deal with 8 more overtimes like that. I just cannot do it. I do not want to do it. The amount of times where I was like, we're in, we're good, don't have to worry about it, it's all good, we got this, no problem, to then I was sitting here going, please don't let them get this, please don't let them get this, is unreal. And thank goodness we didn't have to deal with that. Really not a lot of stats now that I kind of look back at it and I go, yeah, this seems easy. But I want to know, if you guys are watching, still with me, comment below, how do you guys feel about the 2-point conversion situation? I mean, I know the first overtime is just normal. Okay, you score or you kick the field goal, whichever way. And then I know the second one is, if you score, you have to go for 2. And then from that point on, it's 2-point conversions back and forth. And here was one of the things I was thinking about. It kind of irks me, because when the team before you doesn't get the 2-point conversion, man, I really would like to be able to just kick it and be over with, right? But obviously it doesn't work that way. It is what it is. It is what it is. Now let's get to our final overall statistics, because that's what we're all here for, right? And I got to give credit out to one guy. We're going to do it kind of here in just a minute. Nate Frazier. I mean, put it on your back. You get technically the final touchdown there late in this game. 50 yards is what he nets on the night. This is all just rushing. Arian Smith rushes for 30 yards. Dwight Phillips for 13 yards. Carson Beck technically for 10. Roderick for 3. And Cash Jones for 2. We only rushed the ball in this entire football game 108 yards. 108 yards. Kind of surprising. When you look at like total what it looked like for Georgia. Net rushing 108 compared to Georgia Tech's 260. And then again, through the air, 303 for Georgia Tech and 297. When you look at that, obviously total yardage 563 for Georgia Tech to 405. If I just told you that, if I just said, hey, here's the deal, Georgia Tech's going to outgain you 563 yards to 405, and you're going to be shut out in the first half. You're not going to have any points in the first half of the football game. Matter of fact, your first touchdown is going to come in the third quarter, but you're not going to score again until under 5 minutes in this football game. Do you think you win this football game? Because my answer is absolutely not. Unless defensively we have stood up and absolutely stopped the team from scoring whatsoever. That also didn't really happen in this one. But credit out to Georgia Tech, and as much as I don't want to, you kind of have no choice but to give them that credit, because they played one heck of a football game. One heck of a football game. Georgia ends up 23 first downs in this one. Had to punt it a few times. Had to kick it off a few times. Here's probably the biggest difference in this one to me. Time of possession, 37 minutes is how long Georgia Tech had this one. 22 for the opposite. Then obviously the turnovers was a big one in this game as well. We had the one fumble. I think each of us fumbled one time in this entire game, if I recall correctly. Neither of us got any yardage off of it. No interceptions in that one. Again, that's important. We're going to kind of talk about it. Third downs, they went 7 for 15, went for 6 for 12, so both of us right at that 50% mark. Fourth down, they were 1 for 3, we were 1 for 2. Again, fifth down, 50% there. They got to the red zone 6 times, scored 5 of those. We got down there 5 times, scored 4 of those. Let's see. 3 of theirs were touchdowns, 4 of ours were, and then 2 of 3 on the field goal kicking for them. They had 2 sacks in this game. We only had the 1. They had 3 tackles for loss. We also had 3. Our 3 tackles for loss only dropped them 3 yards. Their 3 dropped us 18 yards. One of those, I think, was the big sack at the game where it kind of put us more at midfield. So just a big game. Points off turnover, both teams end up with 7 on this one. Some of the defensive statistics before I get to one of the other categories in here. Smile Munden, 13 total tackles in this game, had the 1 sack. He came from him. C.J. Allen, 10. Dylan Everett, 10. Dalen. Malachi Starks also with 10. Jalen Walker was 6. Dan Jackson was 6. Obviously, the forced strip fumble, 2. I guess you'd call it strip. I don't really think you'd call it strip. Just forced fumble is what I'm going to call it. Tyron Ingram Dawkins also had another forced fumble in this one later as well, or earlier, I should say. Here's kind of the scoring that went on in this that I did want to look at before we get to one of the statistic category, and then we'll kind of move on from things. Here's how things went just throughout the football game. We're going to kind of do a walk down because I like to do this. And I also crack it up because it puts it as 5th quarter when you're playing overtime. But Georgia Tech starts off 3-0, 10-0, 17-0 by the time we get to halftime. 17-6. This is with 9:53 to play in the third quarter. It's Oscar Delp. Okay, that's who got the touchdown. There you go. 17-6 at that point. Then this is where I think all of us were like, man, this is tough. It's 20-6 when Georgia Tech kicks the field goal there at the start of the fourth quarter. And this is where I was like, all right, we can do this. When we made it 20-13 at 8:18 left in the game, I was like, hey, we're in this. We're only back a touchdown. And when they turned right back around and made it 27-13 with 5:37 to play, I think that's where almost every single one of us went, I don't think we got it tonight, boys. And I am included in that because, again, 5:37 and you're down 2 touchdowns. And this is how fast it happened. 3:39 left in the game. We obviously scored the touchdown pass to Dominic Lovett there, 17-yarder from Carson Beck, making it 27-20. And then with 1 minute and 1 second left, the same thing happened for 3 yards to Dominic Lovett, making it 27-27. Then obviously we go for the touchdown there at the start of overtime, and we get it. London Humphreys, 14-yard, and then they get a touchdown. Then we turn around after that. Georgia Tech has to do it. They get the touchdown from Haynes King. They don't get the 2-point conversion. Then we get the touchdown to Cash Jones on the very first play. We don't get the 2-point conversion. Then you know how it goes. Neither of us get a 2-point conversion until we do, right? We got one, then they turn around and got it. And then it seemed like there were 2 or 3. I think there were 2 where neither of us got the 2-point conversion. And that was where the most stress came in this football game, was when we didn't get it, they didn't get it. They didn't get it, we didn't get it. They didn't get it, we didn't get it. And then finally, they didn't get it, we did get it. And the game ended. A couple of different things could have happened in there, which would have made a huge difference in this football game. And a lot of this, the difference in this football game to me was Haynes King, both with his legs and with his arm. And I think more known for maybe his legs than anything. I don't think everybody looks at him as just a passing quarterback. But before I give credit to our guys real quick, I want to give credit to him because this is what he looked like. And I don't remember a quarterback doing this to Georgia recently as far as this big of a statistic. I could be wrong. I could be looking over a game that we might have already played this season. Haynes King ran the ball for 111 yards. Now, he lost 1 yard on the sack. 110 yards on 24 rushes. That's not a running back. Their top running back in this football game ran it 13 times for 94 yards. Two guys, one of which is a quarterback, runs it for 110 yards, and then one of their running backs runs it for 91 yards. Almost two guys rushed for 100 yards in this football game alone. Again, 260 yards on the ground for them. And then again, through the air, Haynes King, 26 for 36, only 10 incompletions, no interceptions on the night, 2 touchdowns. Only got sacked once, which was a huge deal for him in this one. So want to give credit out to him, kudos out to him before we kind of get to this next part. Because this next part is where I want to kind of give some kudos to. Again, I've already kind of done this a little bit with Dan Jackson because without him, much different football game. I don't think Georgia wins this football game if he does not create the havoc play that he did, hitting Haynes King in the backfield, making him fumble, us landing on it, turning around and turning that into points. If that doesn't happen, again, I don't think Georgia wins this football game. But here's another thing. I saw this stat pop up at one point in time, and I thought, that's pretty interesting. Nobody's talking about this, and we're going to talk about it here in a minute. I'm going to bring it up on the screen for us. But as much as in certain games we've kind of looked at our quarterback and said, I just don't think he's the guy. Man, he's making mistakes left and right. And the first one came, obviously, against Alabama. We played Alabama, and Carson Beck didn't have his best game. He'll tell you that. I'm fairly certain he said it at the end of the game. Even in the Texas game, maybe that's when he said it also. He did not have his best game. He was throwing interceptions left and right. He'd throw some touchdowns. He'd keep you in games, and then sometimes he'd feel like he'd take you out of games. And there were a lot of times, especially that Alabama game, the first half of it, a lot of fans and even media members said, man, there might need to be a change here because the first half of that football game, if it hadn't been for Carson Beck, maybe you're in that game. I don't know. I don't know who else was going to change the atmosphere that's on Georgia's team right now. Because the same guy that you feel like, hey, maybe we need to change this out, maybe he's the one that got us into it, is also the one who's gotten us out of a lot of it. And look at that Texas game, our second half against Alabama. Look at that Texas game. Not necessarily the greatest game, but he still had moments where he got us down the field. Look at that Tennessee game just a few weeks ago. Not necessarily the greatest first half. He's the reason you got down the field in the second half. I want to give him credit here because not a lot of people are doing this. And hopefully I remember what button I clicked here to get my little thing pop up. Let's see if I can make it happen. Oh, there we go. All right. So it took me a couple of clicks to actually get to where we need to be. But I want to point this out because I think this is really important. In this football game, again, that we look at here, 28 for 43, 297 yards, has 5 touchdowns total in this football game. Only got sacked twice, but here's the number, and you can see it here on the screen if you're watching. It's got the little asterisk next to it. No interceptions. No interceptions, not just in this football game, but even below it. This is the thing that people I've noticed are not talking about. They all wanted to talk about it just a couple of weeks ago. Everybody wanted to have their moment to be able to say, hey, Carson Beck, hey, he's thrown for, what was it at the time? I don't even remember. 20 touchdowns, but 11 interceptions. But nobody has turned around since this football game, and not even this one, but the past 3 games. Now, all of a sudden, he's thrown 11 touchdowns and no interceptions in those 3 games. I'm not trying to jinx him. I'll knock on wood right here and right now. But nobody wants to give the guy the praise. Nobody wants to give him the credit for that. Because in this game, one of the things I noticed was he really became that game manager. And he's been that. All of his career, he's been that. But in this game, I noticed it even more it wasn't really him thinking about, hey, I don't want to make a mistake, as much as it was, there was nobody there. There were a lot of times where we were covered in a lot of positions. And I saw Eric has even talked about this with drop passes. Georgia, I'm fairly certain, is last in the country as far as drop passes go because we're struggling with that. A lot of that's kind of happening on third downs. But this isn't a discredit to Carson Beck because he's throwing the ball to guys. But also our catch ratio is actually not terrible in comparison as far as player to player. I saw where Eric kind of put this up where people were talking about, hey, Arian Smith's numbers are bad. He's like 63% catch percentage, whereas Mecole, a guy like Mecole who caught everything, it felt like he's only like 67%. So it's not really a big difference in that percentage. And I could have it wrong, Eric. Feel free to kind of correct me on that if you will. But we kind of look at it, and a lot of that is happening because it's key moments. We're in the end zone to win the football game. You catch the football game, we won it. Doesn't happen. Third down, hey, if he catches this football, we got a first down, we're extending the drive, maybe it wins the football game for you. Doesn't happen. We open the game. That's happened multiple times this season where we've opened the game, and he is the fastest dude on the field. I've said this for the past couple of years, and he is wide open downfield or he's deep and just doesn't catch it. It hits him in the hands, and he doesn't catch it. But we kind of got to lay back on a little bit of that criticism against him too, because it's not just him. I think right now we have a whole team confidence, lack of confidence, I should say, in our catching ability as a team in whole, because it's like one guy drops it and then the next guy does, and then the next guy does, and it's like we bounce that around in our heads, and we kind of live with it. We go, man, nobody can catch this football, and we're going to get better. We've got guys that are trying to kind of figure some things out in that, and you got a guy like Dominic Lovett who doesn't really drop anything. Nowadays, I'm looking going, all right, we got Oscar Delp involved a couple of weeks ago. Do it again. Where's that guy? He needs to be that Brock Bowers. He needs to be that Lab McConkey that aren't on your team anymore, by the way, leading the NFL. So if you wonder why is our offense not the same as it was? Well, you got two guys who are leading the NFL in receptions and yardage in the NFL as rookies, and they were on Georgia's team last year. That's why. And I'm not saying these guys have to be those guys on the team this year, but you got to have some people you can rely on to catch football. Dominic Lovett has become that. Dylan Bell, for the most part, is that. Oscar Delp is becoming that. So these are all good things as we're getting deeper into the season that we get to kind of look forward to. But I kind of want to finish that off just by saying, hey, we kind of got to give a little bit of kudos here to Carson Beck, because he's played the football game that you've asked him to. He's played the game that you want him to be able to play, and you should be thankful and grateful for the fact that Carson did do that. I don't know why my screen's not swapping. There we go. But anyways, I'm proud of him, and I hope that he kind of continues that. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens here in the weeks to come, and hopefully everybody kind of takes a chill pill and gives him a break, but also gives him the credit like that. We wanted to criticize him for the mistakes he was making, and now that he's not making those mistakes, nobody wants to really give him the credit for playing really good football since then. Again, I'm not saying that he's perfect. I'm not saying that it's going to win you a national championship, but give him the credit where credit is due when that time comes. What a football game, though. What a game. Georgia obviously winning this one 44-42. Trailed this one 20-6, under 6 minutes to go. Ends up, that's, again, 6 points, under 6 minutes to go. And you score 44. 8 overtimes, not only the most in school history, but also the most in rivalry history, which I'm fairly certain was like 2 or 3. I think this is the only time that this has gone to that many overtimes. And then we were one shy, I believe, of the FBS record, which was 9 overtimes, not to be shadowed by the 7 overtime game before these rule changes happened in the Texas A&M and the LSU game a couple of years ago. That's a fun football game to watch there. Kind of hate that they've changed some rules. Don't really know how I feel about it. It's just some people being on the 3-yard line, it's really easy. It's like, hey, simple. We can make this happen. No big deal. Going for 2. It's not very hard. You get a really short field like that, I can score easy. And then some teams aren't as good from that short distance. So you kind of got to make it work for you at this point. We've broken things down. Credit to Haynes King. Obviously, next week we've got an SEC championship game to kind of preview, but that's the Dogs. Dogs win it 44-42. Again, not the prettiest, not the team that you've seen in the past couple of years that has absolutely dominated everybody they played. But again, I want to revert back to what I said earlier. You've played a really hard schedule, and again, be thankful, be grateful. You're 10-2. You're ranked 5th in the AP poll going into the SEC championship game. You only got to be in a certain criteria here to make the college football playoff. And right now, I think you sit very, very well, unless somehow you just absolutely get throttled in the SEC championship game. You're sitting in a really good spot. So I look forward to seeing what Georgia's going to do against Texas next weekend. We'll kind of break some of that stuff down, get ready for that later on in the week. I do want to run around a couple of the other games around the country real quick before we get out of here, because a lot of these games also have impacts on what's going to happen in the college football playoff as well. Some of them not as much. Right now, like a Tennessee and Vandy. Vandy played with them really hard at the beginning. Actually had the lead, I think, at one point, 14-0 to start this football game. Couldn't really hold on to that. Tennessee ends up coming out on top of that one. They win that game. They finish. That's all they had to do, win that game. And, hey, you're in the college football playoff. You don't have to play in the SEC championship game. And I'm not saying that not playing in the SEC championship game is a bad thing, because it is a good thing. It's awesome that you get to play for it. And I kind of look at it this two ways here. Tennessee is about to get 3 weeks off, essentially, and they're going to play in the first round and probably get to host. I don't really know if I think they'll be on the higher end of the rankings, so I think they're going to get to host a college football playoff game. Good for them. They're sitting in a good spot. They get a 3-week break. If you win the SEC championship game next week, you still get a 3-week break, because when the other teams are playing 2 weeks after that, you're off because you have the bye. Herein lies the rub, though. If you lose this SEC championship game, whether it's Texas, whether it's Georgia, doesn't matter, not only do you only get 2 weeks off from that point, you better hope that you're not hurt, because you're only getting 2 weeks off. Whereas these other teams that you're going to be playing, for example, a Tennessee, let's just say it lined up that way, where Georgia lost to Texas or Texas loses to Georgia, and they line up in the position where it's like, all right, Georgia or Texas now has to play Tennessee. Tennessee has had 3-week break, not having to play in their championship game. They haven't had to play an extra game already. You're their next extra game, and good luck. That's where the hard part of this football season is going to come in, when you have that kind of a result. You have a result of a team like that loses. Case in point, it's going to happen the same way probably for Oregon and Penn State, that are going to be playing in the Big Ten championship as well. Those teams right now I think are ranked 1 and 4, possibly 1 and 3 once this AP poll comes out, or once the college football playoff poll comes out, with Penn State and Oregon there. The loser of that is only going to get a 2-week break, and they're going to have to turn around and play a team who's been on a 3-week break. I somewhat had a rub about this with the Georgia Tech game being on Friday night, because Georgia Tech, I believe, the week previous had played on Thursday, so technically they had 8 days rest, whereas Georgia played on Saturday. They only had 6 days rest before they had to play again. But I digress. That one day shouldn't make a difference, does it? Should it? But one day I think makes a lot bigger difference than people understand. But a week makes a whole lot of a difference in a football game, especially when we're talking about a college football playoff championship on the line. To have possibly lost an entire week by playing in your SEC championship, or playing in your conference championship game in general, to now potentially playing in it, maybe not winning it, even if it's by a field goal, and then you're kind of penalized in that way, where you're about to have to play another football game 2 weeks down against a team who's on a 3-week break, and guess what? You've already played out another football game they haven't had to play. One less football game, one less week that you get to. So a lot is on the line for that. I think that's enough motivation, especially for Georgia, to say, hey, you guys got to win the football game. You need to win the SEC championship game. One, because it gives you a break. That's probably the biggest part of it. You get that break. You get 3 weeks flat before you have to be back on the field. Whereas, again, if you don't, you got 2 weeks to turn it around. Hope you're not beat up at that time. But some of the other games that did happen around the country, Indiana takes care of business 66-0. LSU over Oklahoma 37-17. Michigan upsets Ohio State 13-10. Notre Dame over USC 49-35. Alabama over Auburn 28-14. Pitt and Boston College 34-23. Boston College. Florida does beat Florida State 31-11. This one mattered. Iowa State over Kansas State 29-21, because now I believe Iowa State, because of this game, Arizona State beating Arizona 49-7. And I think one other thing had to happen for this to matter. But now I believe it's Arizona State and Iowa State playing for the Big 12 championship game. So it kind of, and that matters because, again, Arizona State's ranked 14th, Iowa State's ranked 17th. You got to win it. First of all, I don't think either of these losers does not matter. But it makes that game matter for them. Doesn't really matter in the SEC championship game, hopefully, because Georgia should be 1 and maybe 4, 5, 6. And I don't think you shouldn't drop. They've only been dropping teams five slots when they lose a game. So if you were to lose, and you drop 5 slots, you should still be in the playoffs. Whereas this game mattered a lot in the Big 12, because you got Arizona State ranked 14th, Iowa State at the time ranked 17th. They're right on the cusp anyway. But if you win it, you're in, you get the bye. It's a big reason for you guys to want to win that football game. It matters a lot because the loser, you go home. You go play a bowl game. That's all there is to that. Oregon beating Washington 49-21. SMU over Cal 38-6. They will host, after a slew of other confusion on the weekend, they're actually going to host Clemson in the ACC championship game, because this is what's crazy. Even though Clemson lost to South Carolina does beat them 17-14. Miami lost to Syracuse 49-38, which then puts Clemson, who at the time was ranked 12th, is going to be ranked probably around, 18, 19, something like that. They're going to be playing SMU, who's ranked in the top 10 in the ACC championship game. Another one where if Clemson wins this, they may not even be ranked in the top 12, yet they are going to be ranked technically one of the 4 open spots for an ACC champion if they win it. Kind of a strange way to get yourself into it, but strange things did happen this past week. For sure. BYU over Houston 30-18. Georgia Southern over App State 29-20. Yeah, NC State beat North Carolina 35-30. That was wild. Syracuse, we talked about that just a second ago. TCU over Cincinnati 20-13. Louisville smacking Kentucky 41-14, doing what a lot of SEC teams could not do this season. North Texas, Temple, not really worried about that one as much. Army does beat UTSA 29-24. Missouri over Arkansas. I was pulling for Arkansas, but just couldn't do it. 28-21. Texas over Texas A&M. Big game there. A lot of swings in it where it looked like A&M might kind of get back in it, but never happened. Texas over them 17-7, which is what put them obviously into the SEC championship game. That's another one where if Texas A&M would have won that game, they're playing for the SEC championship game. They're playing to keep their college football playoff chances alive. Being ranked 20th, you might have got bumped up, beating the number 3 team. I don't know, maybe to 15. You'd still been right there on that edge where you would have had to win the SEC championship game to keep your playoffs alive. But again, didn't necessarily happen. Again, Tennessee over Vandy, 36-23. We've already seen a lot of these other games that happened earlier in the week. Yeah, Ole Miss over Mississippi State, 26-14. Not the prettiest. Boise State did beat Oregon State 34-18. Probably going to matter for Boise to get in that one. Memphis upsetting Tulane 34-24. So some really good games that were going on. That was one thing I kind of laughed about, was the fact that Ole Miss, at least in the AP poll, just kind of got left alone. They didn't move. They stayed steady. They moved Alabama up. They moved a couple other guys up. South Carolina, they moved them up to be right there on the edge. That's one of the things we're probably going to talk about next week, in next week's episode, because not only do I want to talk about the SEC championship game that's going to be coming up, but I also want to kind of talk about, at that point, we'll be able to talk about the college football playoff rankings, because those are the rankings that truly matter in this. They're not the final ranking, which will be coming out, I would imagine, next Sunday after these championship games. That's going to be the biggest one that matters, obviously, at that time. So that's what we're going to kind of watch, kind of be listening for and all that. Obviously, everybody will have their eyes peeled on that one regardless of what happens in these conference championship games, some of which are going to be meaningful. Again, in Georgia and Texas's case, you want to win this football game so you have that extra week to kind of prepare for the next round, or for the first round of the playoffs by winning it. And then you have some of these that they have to win it to get in general. So it's going to be important, but I still kind of found it was funny. Some teams got left alone. But if I'm looking at it now, if somehow Boise, doesn't find their way in, or if Clemson doesn't win and kind of take that last spot potentially, to me, this is going to be the hardest part for the committee. Do you want to look at the brand? Do you want to look at the team that's always been in the playoffs? Do you want to give them that? Hey, here you go. It's kind of a bone out. Or do you want to look and say, hey, you got another team over here who doesn't have a bad loss, who has really good wins, and yes, they lost to this team by 3, I think, at home, but do you want to give them that? Part of me kind of looks at it and go, okay, well, Georgia lost by 3 in an SEC championship game, got kicked out last year. But that's what this playoff is for, right? So that way that doesn't happen anymore, right? That's not going to happen anymore, is it? I wouldn't think so. But hey, again, like I said, I appreciate you guys being here. I'm looking forward to kind of keeping this thing going again once we get back up and running like we've been doing tonight. I look forward to our next chance to kind of get together and talk about the SEC Championship game coming up later on in the week, which will be happening next weekend. Really looking forward to that one. Big game on tap. Again, if you guys have made it this far, make sure you guys hit that like button. I would greatly appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel, wherever it is you guys listen. And I'll check in with you guys later on in the week. Go Dogs.